Okay, so welcome to today's Changemaker conversation. As a bit of background, Changemakers Conversations is a new series where we're asking experts from their industries to just come and have a conversation with us about their area of expertise, how it relates to mental health, and just provide some kind of down-to-earth and sometimes first-hand experience of how to support somebody's mental health in that particular area. Today, we're joined by Andrew. Andrew's head of operations at Bet No More. He's going to be talking to us about gambling harm, so how gambling links to mental health, how to support somebody who's perhaps struggling with gambling, and also we'll be answering some questions that we've received from the community. Andrew, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit more.
Thanks, Paul. Good to be here. So yeah, as Paul mentioned, I'm Andrew Purslow. I'm the head of operations at Bet No More. I have lived experience of gambling harms, so got into recovery in February 2020, so just over 6 years ago. And I've been working for Bet No More since 2022. So I got into recovery with the support of Bet No More, joining some of their kind of health and wellbeing groups and speaking to others with shared experiences. And yeah, I've worked here since 2022, so just over 4 years in a variety of roles, from kind of like frontline support, if you like, to what is now head of operations. So yeah, love to use my lived experience to help support and educate others on the kind of the risks and the dangers of gambling harms. In terms of what we're going to cover today, so I suppose understanding of gambling harm. So an introduction, really. What do we mean by the term gambling harms? So gambling harm, really, and we'll come into a proper definition. But in terms of like the scope of gambling in the UK, the prevalence of gambling and gambling harms, I've just thought I'd put some figures together. So there's a big survey that happens every year in the UK. It's called the GSGB, so the Gambling Survey for Great Britain, and 48% of adults gambled in the previous 4 weeks. So when the people took the survey, of everybody who was surveyed, 48% of all adults gambled in the previous 4 weeks. So I think that's quite a big figure. So out of the whole population, if you extrapolate obviously the data, that's quite a large number of people. According to the Gambling Commission, 138,000 people could be, and I put it in specifically in kind of inverted commas there, problem gambling. So for 138,000 people, gambling could be an issue for them. And just to kind of put some of these figures into context, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on, gambling is very much a hidden addiction. So as you can imagine, kind of asking people to self-report that they have a problem with gambling is quite difficult. So I would take these figures as a baseline, right? An absolute minimum. And then a further 1.3 million people engage with either moderate or low risk gambling. Although, as I've said, kind of research indicates that could be, and it's likely to be, a lot higher than that. One of my biggest concerns, having children myself, is that last kind of bullet point, which is the increase on the high figure of people under the legal age of gambling in the UK that actually participate in gambling. So around 27% of 11 to 17-year-olds had spent their own money on gambling activity within the last year. So that's a big concern for me as someone who's experienced gambling harm.
Is there differences with young people, like the type of gambling that they're doing compared to adults?
Yeah. Yes, I think obviously that with the emergence of online gambling, but maybe probably 25 years ago now, and with the access to smartphones and internet being a lot easier than it was back then, it's very much online. Online gambling is very prevalent within the younger generation, and even, I suppose, maybe going off topic a little bit, but the gamification of other games. So I know obviously my daughter's only 12, but she plays other games which have an element of gambling in there. So kind of, we talked maybe about like loot boxes and stuff in the past, but things that are similar to that, where you play a game of chance in order to win something, or you stake kind of online kind of currencies or coins in order to win something of value, whether that be skins or a new character or something within a game. So it's kind of slowly kind of festering into all elements of people's childhood, which is of a concern. But yeah, I mean, younger people are drawn towards the more high risk, I would say, high frequency gambling. So you kind of in play sports betting and the slots based stuff, and the very high frequency stuff. So this is just again, hopefully you can see that diagram, but it's effectively part of the survey was to ask people why they gamble, and there's a massive range of reasons why people gamble. Most of them are positive reasons, so because it's fun, because they have a chance of winning, it's something to do, that within, you can kind of read the figures yourself, but there are some, I would say, red flags or some kind of reasons why, which may lead to harms in the future. And I can speak from a kind of personal experience, to get a buzz. So it's that dopamine hit, that rush, that anticipatory waiting for the outcome. So you get that excitement, that feeling of I could win here, or and then the kind of planning that comes along with that. And also another one I would kind of flag as potentially a risk in the future is the one where it talks about emotions or mood. So it helps cheer me up when I feel down, or or I'm in a bad mood. So it's that using gambling to cope with kind of distressful feelings, thoughts, emotions, moods, those kinds of things, which, again, from speaking personally, that they were the reasons why I continued to gamble. So it was, if I'm feeling really bad, I would gamble to help me kind of alleviate those feelings. If I was feeling really positive, it would be a reward, right? Gambling is a reward. Oh, look what you've done. You've done something amazing. Let's go gamble. Yeah. That's a reward for the behavior. So those kind of mood altering reasons, a little bit of a cause for concern, really. And another one just to point out is the kind of familial things. So I think there's something on there somewhere where I talk about family, because something my parents do. So it's, as a society, it becomes acceptable that people gamble frequently because their friends do it, because their family does it, because everyone I know gambles, right? And when I was, without going too much into my story, but as a child, I was around gambling. It was acceptable, but I didn't think anyone in my family had an issue with gambling, but it was very much a go on holiday to the seaside and let's go to the arcades, right? And let's play on the slot machines, or let's play on the 2p counters where you can win toys or money and that kind of stuff. So I think it gets ingrained in people from quite an early age that it's an acceptable thing to do, and it's not necessarily dangerous. So I think that can lead to problems further.
And two things that stood out, just how much like positive reinforcement there is around a lot of these reasons. Yeah. But also, I mean, it sounds like, and maybe it's pretty obvious to say, but it's very rarely just one of these things. It will be a combination of different things coming together.
Yeah, and I think ultimately nobody starts to gamble for negative reasons, right? It's very rarely someone would not just decide to gamble because they feel really lonely, or they're isolated, or they're in a low mood. As you can see, right, 78% of people responded and said they gamble because it's fun. Mm-hmm. And that is the reason why most people start to gamble, right? Whether it's something that you do with friends, go to the races or whatever, right? Or it's an event, it's an occasion, right? It's something that's enjoyable. So it's not, people people experiencing gambling harms. It happens all the time, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But yeah, it's very rarely for any of these kinds of negative reasons that we'll talk about later. We talk about gambling harms. I did touch upon it then. Nobody kind of starts gambling with the intention of causing themselves or others harm. we talk about gambling harm as a continuum. So it's not kind of black and white. You can gamble safely and then it becomes a problem kind of overnight, or you don't just experience harm after one occasion of gambling necessarily, although that could happen. It's a continuum. So we don't go from being in control to being out of control. We go from low level harm. It's fun, it's entertaining, it's a social experience. Gamble occasionally, you set money aside which you expect to lose, right? If you go to the races, for example, you take £50 with the intention of you're going to lose £50, and that's part of the expense of the day. But when we get to kind of repeated behavior and behavior that becomes a habit, and we start getting kind of the moderate harm, which is on this continuum. So start overspending and kind of not being able to stay within those boundaries that you might set yourself. And then you get into like the kind of the secrecy, which is a big thing, which again we will touch on a little bit later on. So not telling people how much you're spending, becoming a bit isolated from others because you feel guilty about how long you spend gambling or how much you spend gambling, and it becomes a more frequent thing. So you might, from going to the races with friends, you might think, oh, actually there's racing happening today, I might pop into the bookies and have a quick bet on another horse race somewhere else, and it kind of creeps. I don't think it's ever kind of anyone's intention to go from having fun to not having fun, right? It's a progressive thing that happens over time with that repetition and repeated behaviors. And I think once you start doing that, you start getting into the high level. It starts becoming a bit more problematic for people, and you start to get what we call like cognitive distortion. So that distorted thought patterns of I must be due a win now. I've lost the last 5 times I've bet on red on the roulette. It's got to be black this time, right? Even though what logic dictates it's still a 50 or close to a 50-50 chance.
Yeah.
Every time the wheel spins. So you get into that them distorted thought patterns, which becomes extremely difficult to kind of see when you're in that moment. So yeah, I see it as a continuum, and you can go up and down that continuum. So you can go from high level of harm back down to low level, and I experienced that a number of times. So I could control my gambling in social situations, and it's that outward perception. So I would never gamble to extremes in the presence of others, especially close family members, because I didn't want them to see how bad it was. So that there's sometimes the ability to kind of restrain, and whether that could be due to access to money. So let's say you spent all your money on payday, or for the next 3 weeks or 4 weeks, you might not have any access to funds. So it's very much kind of a continuum which goes kind of up and down. That
kind of going up and down the continuum, would you say that's just the case between low level and moderate, and as soon as somebody's in the high level harm, that they're just stuck there then? Like it's a very good question. I think it's potentially individual. You can't. I did experience, even though I would categorize myself as someone who was suffering high level of harms, I could still at times go out and enjoy gambling on a moderate level or a low level. But I couldn't always control that. That's I think that's the thing to differentiate. It wasn't always, I wasn't able to consciously control whether I could stop. I don't know if that makes any sense whatsoever, but there could be times where I would go to the bookies, for example, with the intention of putting a £10 accumulator on. That was my intention, was to put a £10 accumulator on, and I could leave there having put a £10 accumulator on and not placed any other bets. But then I could also go to the bookies with the same intention, and then come out 3 hours later having lost all my money. Right. Yeah. So I think there's not a definite answer, unfortunately, to that. But I think it's very, very difficult once you've experienced the kind of high level harm to go back to level without some form of intervention. we speak a lot about early intervention in mental health. So try to spot the signs early, try and get on top of things before they, develop into something much worse. So I guess on this continuum, that would be the moderate harm part.
Yeah.
Like if you start spotting any of those things in yourself or in a friend or family member, that moderate harm is the point of there's an opportunity for early intervention. But I guess the difficulty comes with the fact that, like you said, somebody might be showcasing moderate harm behaviors one particular week, but then the following week it might be back down to low level. So, going in with early intervention then might completely miss the mark and be tone deaf, because they'll be like, no, I'm not overspending.
Yeah, I think in early intervention is obviously huge, and I think more generically, I think there needs to be more done, and hopefully we're doing that as a charity, and other charities within this sector are doing that work. But it's just about educating people about this is what we're doing today, right? So educating people about the risks, what you see, even adverts on the telly where everyone's having fun, winning money. That the betting companies advertise that quite frequently. It's about having a counter to that, which is actually it can be fun for lots of people, but also it's very dangerous as well for a number of people. So and I think even more importantly is telling people that there is support out there. I think as a gambler, I never knew anything about kind of people who were addicted to gambling or people who were previous gamblers who now didn't gamble anymore, right? I didn't knew anybody who was like that. I just knew people who gambled, right? I guess because those were the circles I kind of but that was the society I kind of interacted with. But it's just actually, let's tell people that if you want to stop, you can stop. And there are people out there who have done exactly what you've done and have stopped and have created a better life where they don't need gambling. They don't, they've built a life where they don't need to escape from their problems. They don't need to feel like gambling is the only thing that can give them that escape. And, they build a better life with hope for the future. I think that's the message that I'd like to give to as many people as possible, really. This is a definition by Heather Wardle and others who did a study around gambling harm framework. So they're trying to define what gambling harms look like, really. And they talk about gambling related harms. That term has kind of been left behind a little bit, and we just refer to them as gambling harms now. But Heather Wardle said that gambling related harms are the adverse impacts from gambling on the health and well-being of individuals, families, communities, and society. And I think it's extremely important to recognize that it's not just the individual who suffers in this scenario. It's about everybody else who is affected. And I think, there's lots of studies about how many people are affected by an individual's gambling when they are suffering with gambling harms. And I think there's a wide range, but as you can imagine, it's anything between maybe 5 and 20 people who are impacted by somebody else's. So whether that's family members, work colleagues, children, wives, partners, husbands, wives, everyone is impacted at some level. And that's not, not just in terms of relationships, but in terms of communities and society as a whole, right? If we talk about the criminal justice system and all, that kind of stuff, and fraud committed to fund gambling and all, it has wide-ranging consequences for society as a whole, rather than just the individual. And they're wide-ranging, right? When we talk about gambling harms, they could be absolutely anything. We talk about kind of comorbidity, so mental health and its relationship to gambling. I think they're interlinked. It's very much a cyclical thing in my experience. So it's whether gambling is the symptom or the cause, again, is, I think, debatable. It could be either or both at the same time. So, there's this interplay between poor mental health and gambling. So let's play out a scenario. So you're suffering with poor mental health for it could be a myriad of reasons, and you use gambling as an escape from that. So you feel you've got low mood, you go to gamble because you think it'll make you feel better. So you go to gamble, you lose all your money, you feel extremely remorseful and guilty, and your mental health gets worse, right? And then it happens again. So you think, oh, actually, I feel terrible. What could I do? I've got some more money. I've got access to. I'll go back to the bookies and I'll win my money back, or and for a moment, there's that hope that actually this could solve my mental health, the way I'm feeling at the minute.
Yeah.
And it just becomes that cyclical kind of negative process, and it's difficult to stop that. In terms of other kind of gambling related harms, maybe we talk about comorbidity. So there is strong links between ADHD and gambling as well. So that comes with kind of that impulsivity and increased appetite for risk taking.
Yeah.
It becomes extremely difficult to kind of control those intense urges to gamble. And also important to highlight kind of cross addictions as well. So people who have an addiction to gambling are more likely to have addiction to other things. So whether that be alcohol, drugs, food, all those kinds of things are kind of relatable. There's a little bullet point there in terms of gambling as a secret addiction. It's very commonly referred to as a hidden addiction. Unlike alcohol and drugs, it's not always outwardly obvious that someone's suffering with a gambling addiction. There are lots of ways that as gamblers we can hide things that are happening for us. I was extremely good at putting on a mask. I had an important job with lots of responsibility. I believe I was quite good at my job, so I had lots of responsibility. I was able to carry out my job very well whilst still in secret gambling. It's quite easy. It's quite easy to hide, right? In terms of the outcomes, so the outputs of gambling, the harms that you might experience, so poor mental health, that could be attributed to a number of things, right? You wouldn't automatically think, oh, he's suffering depression, right? You wouldn't automatically think, oh, he must be gambling, right? That's just too big of a leap to take. And all the other things can be attributed to something else. So a lack of funds, the amount of excuses I've made for why I don't have any cash, right? I borrowed my friend some money. His car was broke down. I borrowed him some money. I'll get it back next month. Everything can be almost talked away, right? And the impact, unless you know somebody's gambling, it's very difficult to pinpoint that as a reason. And there's lots of stories from affected others where they say, I thought my partner was cheating on me with another person. That's because that's what it can feel like. There's that much kind of secrecy and kind of cloak and dagger about some of the stuff that happens. It's quite easy to attribute it to something else. And it
sounds like as well, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but when you talk about wearing that mask, particularly for gambling, obviously we're familiar with wearing a mask in front of others to keep it secret from others, but it seems like that mask is just as much for yourself as well. It's very easy to keep it hidden from yourself almost and not admit to yourself.
Yeah, that's absolutely a great point. For years and years and years, I suffered harm, right, from my own gambling. At no point did I honestly hold my hands up and think I've got a big problem here. It never occurred to me that I was causing so much destruction to myself and to others. It never once crossed my mind. Oh, I say it never crossed my mind. I was never willing to openly admit to myself. I was never willing to accept that gambling had me beat, basically, right? Because that's what it was. I couldn't deal with this any longer. It's almost that determination to not give up. It sounds silly, but it's almost like, actually, I don't want to admit that I can't do this normally, in inverted commas. Yeah, it's a very good point in terms of, the first step is admitting you have a problem, right, to yourself. That's the first step to kind of getting support.
And hopefully, I suppose that's why the second section that we'll get onto today, how to support others, is hopefully going to be very, very valuable for people, because I think it's really clear that it can be quite tricky to approach those conversations given all of these factors that go into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the kind of third bullet point we have there about myths and misconceptions, that they're not helpful, right? In kind of increasing the shame and the stigma that comes along with kind of gambling addiction and gambling harms. So let's talk a little bit, if we can, about the kind of misconceptions. And there's loads of them. Everyone will have heard them, or potentially even thought of them. And in all honesty, I thought them as well whilst I was gambling. So there's things, probably one of the biggest ones is people who gamble are greedy. They do it because they have this obsession with money. I didn't have an obsession with money. I was in a well-paid job. Obviously, yes, by the nature of gambling, you gamble to win money, right? But I think when you get to the point where you're suffering extreme harm, it's no longer about the money. You're not gambling to be greedy. You're gambling because it's a mechanism to cope with underlying issues that you can't deal with in your life. And gambling is the currency, right? That's the currency you need in order to fund that behavior. It's a behavioral addiction. Towards the end of my gambling, I wanted to lose. When I was at the point where I wanted to get help and support, I openly wanted to lose my money so I could just get on with my day. I used to go to the bookies and I'd just spin whatever I could do as fast as I could do to lose the money I had in my pocket, because then I knew I could just leave and continue with the rest of my day. So it's not always about the need to win. It's more about that kind of the release, that emotional kind of release.
Yeah.
And I suppose goes along with that is that people see people who gamble as irresponsible. And I think, again, I would say throughout my addiction, I'm a very responsible person. I take things very seriously. I had a serious job. I was very careful with money as well. I would make sure that all bills got paid. I was very frugal. I wouldn't, I'd look for deals in supermarket, that kind of stuff. I was an extremely responsible person outside of that world of gambling. I'll just touch on one more, which is why I will. The amount of times I've heard this said to me and to others is quite incredible. But it's why don't you just stop?
Okay.
Yeah. I compare it to, would you tell someone who's suffering with insomnia to just go to sleep? It's not that easy, shall we say? But yeah, I think there's a misconception that because maybe because it's around money, right? And because as a society, we don't necessarily like to talk about money or to share information about money. I think maybe that increases the stigma around it.
Yeah.
And I think also, sorry, just to touch on one more, that comes up quite often, is that people who are gamblers or who suffer with gambling harm have a lack of willpower. They're not, they should just try harder to stop gambling. And I think when you refocus on the fact that it's a behavioral addiction that requires support and treatment, right, in order to sustain that behavioral change. I would just finish on, there is help and support out there. That's the takeaway message, is that if you feel like you are or somebody else is experiencing harms because of gambling, then there is help and support out there. And in one of the future videos, we'll talk about signposting and some of the kind of resources that are available out there.
One question I had: did you ever receive some of the advice around the misconceptions? Like, did anybody ever say to you, just stop, or it's because you've got no willpower? And how did that feel for you?
I think the why don't you just stop one, often, and I found it. I think it is stigmatizing because if I could just stop, I would stop, right? If it was a case of just wanting to stop, I wanted to stop for a long time. I just didn't know how. I didn't know. I didn't understand why I was gambling. I just knew it was something I'd always done from a young age, and I think what wasn't necessarily any adverse childhood experiences that I had. I had a great childhood. It was just that from an early age, gambling was something that was a positive thing, and I think when I experienced difficulties in life, it was always something that I could almost rely upon to make me feel good.
Yeah.
So I just think that obviously that's how it started to become a bit more harmful. But yeah, I think it is quite infuriating when people say, "Well, why don't you just stop?" As if like I'd never thought of that myself. Do you know what I mean? I think it's difficult. I also appreciate for someone who's never experienced an addiction, it's difficult to understand, right? Without being educated and without having been through it or having someone close to you who's been through it, it is difficult to understand why people would continue to do something which is so harmful to themselves and to others. It doesn't make sense if you've not experienced it.
Yeah. Well, hopefully conversations like today can help reduce that stigma, allow people to have a little bit more empathy and understanding in the conversations that they have.